Okay, so let's talk about one of the most complicated figures in American history, Woodrow Wilson. He was a president who pushed for democracy all over the world, while at the same time, kind of suppressing it back home. He literally created the financial system we use today, but he also set back civil rights for decades. It's a story full of contradictions, and it's one that, believe it or not, still really shapes the US. So, where do you even start with a guy like that? Is he a progressive hero, or was he a regressive, a backward force? And the thing is, the answer is, well, he was both. And that's exactly what makes his story so fascinating and honestly so important for us to get our heads around. I mean, just look at this. On one hand, you have this total visionary, the guy who created the Federal Reserve, who championed this brand new world order built on peace. But on the other hand, you have a man who segregated the federal government and cracked down hard on free speech. How can one person be both of those things? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to try to piece together. All right, let's start with Wilson the Reformer. Because when he came into office, he had this incredibly ambitious agenda he called the New Freedom. He was ready to go head-to-head with the biggest corporations in America and completely reshape the nation's economy. And man, he did not waste any time. He pushed through the Federal Reserve Act to stabilize the whole banking system. He created the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to protect you and me from shady business practices. And he signed the Clayton Antitrust Act to break up huge monopolies that were killing competition. We're not just talking about a few new rules here. This was a fundamental rewiring of the American economy. Just think about it for a second. The Federal Reserve. You hear about it on the news practically every day, right? That was a cornerstone of Wilson's vision. It gave the government this incredible new power to manage the economy, and its impact is something we still feel every single day. But, and this is a huge but, for all of those progressive economic ideas, there was a very, very dark side to Wilson's presidency, a side that would end up leaving a deep and pretty painful scar on the country. Yeah, this is a stain on his record that you just can't look away from. Wilson's administration, led by a president who grew up in the South during the Civil War's aftermath, systematically resegregated the federal government. African-American employees who had spent decades making real progress were suddenly demoted, fired, or shoved into separate and, of course, unequal workspaces. It was a devastating step backward that slammed the door on opportunity for generations of people. And his position on women's right to vote was, well, it was just as troubling. For years, he basically just ignored the activists who were tirelessly protesting, picketing the White House, even getting arrested for their cause. He only came around to endorsing the 19th Amendment when it became politically impossible not to. For a lot of people, it was a classic case of too little, way too late. But while all this was happening at home, the entire world was catching on fire. The flames of World War I were spreading across Europe, and Wilson was about to face a decision that would change the course of history and define his presidency forever. You know, for years, America just watched from the sidelines. But by 1917, German aggression was getting impossible to ignore. And so, Wilson declared that the world must be made safe for democracy. With those 5 words, America was at war. But see, for Wilson, just winning the war wasn't enough. He had this incredible dream of a world without war, a world where countries could solve their problems with words, not with weapons. And so he came up with the League of Nations, a truly bold, almost audacious plan for a new world order. And here is the truly cruel twist in the story. Wilson's greatest dream was completely crushed by his own country. The U.S. Senate, terrified of getting tangled up in foreign problems, refused to join the League of Nations. It just left his grand vision for global peace in tatters and handed him the biggest political defeat of his life. And as if the war and the whole League fight weren't enough, his second term was just a perfect storm of crises. He passed the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which basically crushed free speech. Thousands were jailed, including a guy who ran for president just for speaking out against the war. Then, the 1918 flu pandemic hit, killing way more Americans than the war ever did. And on top of all that, a massive stroke left the president completely incapacitated, hidden away from the public while his wife secretly and effectively ran the country. It was just chaos. So, who was Woodrow Wilson? Was he a visionary reformer, a racist, a global peacemaker? The truth is, he was all of those things. And that's what makes his legacy so endlessly fascinating and so deeply, deeply troubling. I mean, his achievements were absolutely monumental. A modern financial system, leading the country to victory in a world war, and dreaming of a world without conflict. But his failures, they were just as huge, resegregating the government, crushing free speech, and in many ways betraying the very democratic ideals he claimed to love. To really get Wilson, you have to look at both sides of this coin. So in the end, we're left with this person who was both a hero and a villain, a progressive and a reactionary. He really did embody the best and the absolute worst of America at that time. And his story forces us to ask a really tough question. How do we judge a leader who was so right about some things and just so profoundly wrong about others?